Send a unit immediately. There's a trespasser destroying community property at 211447 Crystal Springs.
That's what the HOA president screamed into her phone while standing on the curb pointing at my driveway. I was changing the oil on my son's 15-year-old Ford F-150, the same truck that carried him to his first Boy Scout camp, in cargo shorts and an Army PT shirt. By the time the patrol unit rolled in, 3 of her board members had gathered with their phones out, and one was already live streaming. The MPs stepped out, walked toward me, looked at my face, and snapped a salute so crisp I could hear the gloves hit. That's the thing about people drunk on HOA power. They write the complaint before they read the name on the mailbox. What she didn't know was that I'd been sworn in as her installation's new garrison commander 4 weeks earlier, and the provost marshal whose unit she was screaming at reported directly to me. So I didn't argue. I returned the salute, wiped my hands on a rag, and started a folder. Tell me below, what would you have done? My name is Bennett Whitford. I'm a colonel in the United States Army. I command the garrison at Fort Calhoun, an installation of 38,000 soldiers, civilians, and family members tucked into the foothills south of Colorado Springs. Garrison commander is not a glamorous job. It does not come with parades or medals. What it does come with is responsibility for every gate, every barracks, every chapel, every school, every chow hall, every military police patrol, and every housing dispute on a piece of federal land the size of a small city. I'm 52 years old. I have 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, and a graduate degree from the Naval Postgraduate School. I have been married to Eleanor for 26 years. She teaches 8th grade history at a public school in Manitou Springs. Our son Caleb is 19, a sophomore at Colorado State studying mechanical engineering, home for the summer. We have a yellow lab named Buster, who is mostly retired from any duty heavier than sleeping in the sun. We moved into Aspen Bluff Estates in late April. It's a private HOA-managed neighborhood, half a mile outside the main gate of Fort Calhoun. About 60% of the residents are military families. The other 40 are civilian retirees, defense contractors, and a handful of executives from the aerospace plants out toward Pueblo. The houses are nice, the lots are big, the views of the Front Range are the kind of thing that makes you stop the car in the driveway just to look. Eleanor cried the first time she saw the back deck at sunset. Caleb whistled at the garage. I signed the paperwork the same day. The HOA president was a woman named Margaret Larkin. She went by Maggie. She'd been president of the Aspen Bluff Board for 8 years, by uncontested vote each cycle, which is what happens when nobody else wants the job, and the person who has it makes the rest of the neighborhood too tired to fight her. She drove a pearl-white Lexus SUV with a vanity plate that said HOAQ. She had blonde hair done at a salon every Friday in Old Colorado City, and a habit of wearing tailored linen blazers over yoga pants and tinted sunglasses, even on cloudy days. Her husband Greg was a civilian employee on base, mid-level in the Garrison Public Works office. He had been there long enough to think he was untouchable. He was wrong about that, but he didn't know it yet. The first letter came 9 days after we moved in. It was on cream-colored Aspen Bluff letterhead, with a gold foil pine cone in the corner. It welcomed us to the neighborhood. It noted that our vehicles bore Texas plates, which would need to be updated to Colorado registration within 30 days per HOA bylaw 7.2. It noted that our son's truck had visible oxidation on the rear quarter panel, and asked us to address the issue per HOA Aesthetic Standard 4.4. It noted that the moving boxes stacked in our garage were visible through the open door, and requested that we keep the garage door closed during daylight hours. It was signed at the bottom in looping cursive by Margaret Larkin, President. Eleanor read it twice, looked up at me from the kitchen island, and said, "Is this real?" I told her it was real. I told her to file it. I told her that in 26 years of moving every 2 or 3 years, this was somewhere between the 4th and 7th time we had gotten a welcome letter that was actually a hit list, and that the best thing she could do was put it in a clear plastic sleeve in a binder, and forget the woman's name for as long as the woman would let us. Maggie Larkin would not let us, not even close. The second letter came 11 days later. It informed us that Caleb's truck, parked in our own driveway, was in violation of Aesthetic Standard 4.4 because the rust spots had not been addressed. The fine was $400, It also informed us that Eleanor's minivan, with its Texas plates still on it because the registration office at the Pikes Peak DMV was running a 6-week backlog, was in violation of Bylaw 7.2. That fine was $300. The total was $700 for sins committed entirely on private property we had legally purchased. I poured a cup of coffee and walked outside in my socks to look at our driveway. It was a Saturday morning in early May, just after sunrise. The air smelled like cut grass and hot asphalt warming under a sky that was already pure Colorado blue. The mountains to the west were still pink at the peaks. Eleanor's minivan was parked exactly where it belonged, in our driveway, with all 4 wheels on our concrete. Caleb's F-150, the one he had bought with his lifeguard money in high school, sat next to it. The rust on the rear quarter panel was the size of a man's hand. The truck started every morning. It got Caleb to school and back for 2 years. He loved it, the way 19-year-old boys love the first thing that is theirs. I drank my coffee. I thought about it. I made a decision. I was not going to fight Maggie Larkin over a fine. I was going to file the fine in my binder, the way Eleanor had filed the first letter, and I was going to wait. Because a person who behaves like Maggie Larkin in week 2 of your residence does not stop in week 3. She escalates. And when she escalates against the wrong man, the file becomes evidence. I keep a binder for every residence. I have done it since 1997, when a landlord in Fayetteville tried to keep our deposit by inventing damage we never caused. I learned then that the person who keeps the cleanest paper trail wins every dispute that involves paper. I learned later, in 3 combat deployments, that the same principle applies to most fights worth winning. The man with the better records, calmer voice, and longer patience usually walks away with what he came for. I labeled the new binder Aspen Bluff in pencil on the spine. I put the first welcome letter in tab 1. I put the second fine notice in tab 2. I drove to the FedEx store and made notarized copies of both. I added a third tab labeled simply Ignored, because I did not pay the $700 and I did not intend to. What I did do that same Saturday afternoon was drive into the base. Fort Calhoun's main gate sits at the end of Aspen Bluff Drive. It is a 4-lane checkpoint with concrete bollards, a flagpole, and a guard shack manned by 2 MPs from the 716th Military Police Battalion. The unit reports to the Provost Marshal, a lieutenant colonel named Russell Easton. The Provost Marshal, in the chain of garrison command, reports to me. I drove through the gate. The MP at the booth saluted. I returned the salute. I drove past the parade ground, where the post-bagpipe band was rehearsing for Memorial Day in the slow, mournful way bagpipes always sound, and I parked at the brick building with the green awning that housed the garrison headquarters. I went into my office. I shut the door. I called Lieutenant Colonel Easton on the secure line. "Russ," I said, "I need a favor. I need a quiet, no-fuss read on something." "Sir, name it." "I need to know how many calls Aspen Bluff Estates has placed to your dispatch in the last 12 months. Just the address, just the call types, no flags, no paperwork." He was quiet for half a second. Then I heard him chuckle. "Sir, I have been waiting for somebody at your level to ask me that for 2 years. "How many?" 341 in the last 12 months, sir. Nuisance complaints, noise, suspicious vehicles, suspicious persons. Most of the complaining party is a single resident at the same address. I will email you a sanitized summary by close of business Monday." I told him I would appreciate it. I hung up. I sat at my desk for a long minute, looking out the window at the flagpole and the long shadow it threw across the gravel. 341 calls, from one neighborhood, from mostly one woman, to my MPs. The summary arrived Monday morning. 278 of those calls had been placed by the same number, registered to one Margaret R. Larkin of Aspen Bluff Estates. Of those 278, exactly 0 had resulted in any documented violation by the subject party. Every single one had been against a military family living in Aspen Bluff Estates. Every single one had been about parked trucks, basketball hoops, dogs in yards, kids playing too loud, garage doors left open, and one memorable complaint about an active-duty staff sergeant who had committed the offense of grilling burgers on a Wednesday evening. I pulled the rosters. Of the residents Maggie Larkin had reported, All but two were enlisted soldiers, ranks E4 through E7, privates and sergeants. The kind of soldiers who could not afford to push back against an HOA fine because their paychecks did not have the slack and their leadership did not have the time. The kind of soldiers who get crushed by a person like Maggie Larkin and never make the news. I closed the folder. I made one quiet note in the margin, in pencil. 3 words. Stop her now. I did not move on Maggie Larkin that week, or the next. I let her come to me. She came on the second Saturday of May, just before noon, while I was kneeling on the driveway concrete with an oil pan under Caleb's truck and a wrench in my hand. The morning had warmed up fast. Buster the lab was asleep in the grass. Caleb was in the garage, cussing at a stuck filter wrench. Eleanor was inside the house with the windows open, baking something with cinnamon in it. I was wearing cargo shorts, an Army PT shirt that was older than my son, and rubber sandals. I had grease on my forearm and a smear of it across my chin. Maggie Larkin's pearl Lexus pulled to the curb. She got out without closing the door. She stood at the edge of our property line in a coral linen blazer, white slacks, and the tinted sunglasses, holding a clipboard like a sword. "Sir," she called, "I need to speak with the head of household." I stood up slowly, wiped my hands on a rag, and walked to the end of the driveway. That would be me. She did not introduce herself. She launched. "We've sent 2 formal notices and you have ignored both. The fines are now overdue. The vehicles are still in violation. The truck has visible structural deterioration. You have a moving box pile visible through your garage. And I have just been informed by my board that you have failed to register for HOA membership identification, which is required within 30 days of move-in. The fines are now $1,100 and growing." I let her finish. I did not interrupt. When she ran down, I asked her one question. "Mrs. Larkin, are you aware that several of the bylaws you're citing may be unenforceable against active-duty military residents under federal law?" She blinked behind the sunglasses, just once. Then she straightened. "I do not know who told you that, sir, but I assure you the bylaws of Aspen Bluff Estates are valid and enforceable against every resident, military or civilian. I would suggest you spend less time arguing legalities and more time addressing the rust on that vehicle, or it will be towed." That was the moment, the word towed. She had said it out loud, in front of a witness, on my own property line. "Mrs. Larkin," I said, "I'm going to give you one piece of advice, and I'm only going to give it once. Walk back to your vehicle. Drive home. Do not return to this driveway. Do not contact me, my wife, or my son. Anything you wish to communicate from this point forward goes to my attorney." She laughed, a short, dry, performative laugh. "Sir, I am the elected president of the Aspen Bluff Homeowners Association. I do not take instructions from new residents who think they can park whatever they want in their driveway." She pulled her phone out of her blazer pocket. She dialed 3 numbers. She put the phone to her ear. "Yes," she said, loud enough for me to hear. "I need to report a man at 318 Aspen Bluff Drive who is hiding combat vehicles in a residential zone and refusing to comply with community safety bylaws. I believe he may be unauthorized military personnel. Please send a unit immediately." She had called my military police on me, on my own driveway, while I was changing the oil on my son's truck. The patrol unit arrived 9 minutes later. A white Chevy Tahoe with the green and yellow MP striping. 2 soldiers stepped out. The driver was a sergeant named Holloway, a man I had pinned promotion stripes on at a ceremony 4 weeks earlier. The passenger was a young private I had never met. They walked up the driveway with the practiced calm of men who answer this kind of call too often. Sergeant Holloway saw me first. His eyes went wide for exactly half a second. Then his hand came up in a salute, so sharp the leather of his glove cracked against his brow. The young private, 2 beats behind, recognized something was happening and snapped to himself. "Garrison commander on the driveway," Sergeant Holloway said, by reflex, the way a soldier announces a senior officer entering a room. "At ease, Sergeant," I said. I returned the salute. I tilted my chin toward Maggie. "Mrs. Larkin here has reported me as an unauthorized military personnel, hiding combat vehicles. I'd like you to assess the situation." Maggie Larkin's mouth opened. It stayed open for about 3 seconds. The clipboard was still in her hand. Her sunglasses had slid down her nose. Her board members, who had drifted across the cul-de-sac to watch the show, had stopped moving. One of them was holding her phone in landscape mode, with the red recording dot already lit. Sergeant Holloway turned to Maggie with the kind of patience that only a senior NCO can summon when they are about to deliver bad news to someone too proud to hear it. "Ma'am," he said, "this is Colonel Bennett Whitford. He is the commanding officer of the United States Army garrison at Fort Calhoun. The provost marshal who runs my battalion reports to him. The military police you just dialed are his unit, ma'am, and the truck behind him is a privately owned 2009 Ford F-150, which, with respect, is not a combat vehicle." There is a particular shade of red that a person's face turns when they realize, in real time, that they have just walked into a room they cannot walk out of. I have seen it on insurgents. I have seen it on senators. I had never, until that morning on my own driveway, seen it on a 56-year-old HOA president in a coral linen blazer. She did not apologize. She did not back down. She straightened her spine, lifted her clipboard like a shield, and said the 7 words that ensured everything that came next. "This isn't over. I'm going higher than him." She tried to. I will give her that. She was a woman who, when shown a wall, looked for a window, and when shown a window, looked for a roof. By Tuesday morning, Maggie had filed 3 formal complaints. The first went to my own office, addressed to Lieutenant Colonel Whitford, demanding disciplinary action against a junior officer who had refused to comply with civilian community standards. She had gotten the rank wrong by an entire grade. My adjutant, a captain named Sloan Pemberton, brought it into my office holding it between 2 fingers like it might bite, and asked if I wanted to respond. I told her to stamp it received, file it in the appropriate folder, and forward a copy to JAG. She smiled the small, tight smile of a captain who already knew where this was heading. The second complaint went to the Inspector General's office at Fort Calhoun. The IG's job is to investigate fraud, waste, abuse of authority, and command climate issues. Maggie's complaint accused me of abuse of position because I had identified myself as the garrison commander to a military police patrol on my own driveway. The IG officer, a major I had served with at Fort Hood 10 years earlier, called me on Wednesday morning. "Sir," she said, "I am required by regulation to inform you that a complaint has been filed. I am also required to inform you that, having reviewed it, I have determined it has no merit and is being closed. I'd love to know what you did to this lady." I told her I had parked in my own driveway. She laughed for 15 seconds and hung up. The third complaint was the one Maggie put real money behind. She hired a civilian attorney out of Denver, a woman who specialized in HOA enforcement actions, and filed a notice of intent to sue against the Whitford family for unpaid HOA fines, which by then had ballooned to $2,400 through compounded daily penalties. The notice was served at the front door by a process server in a gray polo shirt who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Eleanor signed for it, brought it inside, and added it to my binder with the patience of a woman who had once spent 3 months filing FOIA requests against a school district that tried to fire her for assigning a book. Then Maggie escalated again. This time she made a tactical mistake she did not realize was a mistake. She organized an emergency meeting of the Aspen Bluff HOA board on the first Thursday of June. The agenda, distributed by email to all 68 homeowners and posted on the community board outside the clubhouse, listed a single action item: disciplinary review and emergency assessment regarding non-compliant residents at 318 Aspen Bluff Drive. By the time Eleanor and I arrived, in casual clothes, the clubhouse parking lot held 31 vehicles. The room was full. Half the residents looked uncomfortable. The other half looked like they were waiting for a hanging. Maggie ran the meeting. She read the violations aloud, one by one, in the tone of voice prosecutors use to read indictments. She projected photographs of our driveway onto the wall. She had a poster board on an easel showing Caleb's truck with the rust spot circled in red marker. She made a motion, seconded by her vice president, to fine us $5,000 and to demand removal of all non-conforming vehicles within 48 hours, by towing if necessary. The motion passed 7-2. The two no votes were cast by an Air Force major's wife and a retired Army lieutenant who had, I would later learn, been quietly waiting 2 years for someone to fight back. Eleanor sat next to me through all of it, with her hand on my knee. She did not flinch. When the vote was called, she leaned over and whispered, "I want her name in a federal indictment by July." I whispered back, "Working on it, sweetheart, working on it." I did not speak at the meeting. I did not have to. I stood up at the end, in my civilian shirt and jeans, and said one sentence into the microphone before walking out. For the record, the Service Members Civil Relief Act preempts every action this board has just taken against my family, and against every other military family in this neighborhood. You will be hearing from federal counsel. I walked out into the lobby. Eleanor followed. Caleb was waiting in the truck with the engine running. We drove home in silence with the windows down. The mountains to the west were turning that pale pink they get in early June, just before the alpenglow fades. The air smelled like wild sage and rain coming. That night, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to the director of the Garrison Housing Office, a civilian named Pearl Whitman, who had been at Fort Calhoun for 22 years and knew where every body in housing was buried. I asked her to pull every fine, eviction notice, and complaint Aspen Bluff Estates had filed against any active duty resident in the last 8 years, by dollar value, by rank, by outcome. The second was to the Federal Contracting Office at Fort Calhoun's Garrison Public Works Division. I asked the contracting officer, a retired Army Master Sergeant named Hadley Voss, to pull every groundskeeping, landscaping, and snow removal contract awarded by his office in the last 6 years, by vendor, by bid history, by signing officer. The third was to my JAG officer, Major Sloan Pemberton, the same captain who had walked the first complaint into my office. I told her I was about to need her, full-time, on something that was going to grow. She said, "Sir, I have been on this since Tuesday." I told her she was the best officer I had ever worked with. I poured a glass of bourbon. I sat at the kitchen table with my binder and a pen, and I started building the case the way I had been taught to build them. From the bottom up, slow, quiet, documented, devastating. The records came back over the next 9 days. They came in sealed manila envelopes, hand-delivered by clerks I had served with at 3 previous installations. They came on memory sticks I plugged into a clean laptop in a SCIF on the 2nd floor of the headquarters building. They came in printed columns that I spread across the conference room table at 0600 each morning before anyone else was in the building. By the 2nd Friday of June, I had 2 stories told entirely in paper. Story 1 was the SCRA story. The Service Members Civil Relief Act is a federal statute that has been on the books in some form since 1940. It is the United States government's promise to its uniformed members that civilian creditors, landlords, courts, and yes, homeowners associations cannot use the absences and disruptions of military service against them. It caps interest rates, it freezes evictions, it restricts default judgments, and in many states, including Colorado, it places sharp limits on the kinds of fines and assessments an HOA can impose on an active duty service member without specific notice and judicial review. The law is not new. The law is not obscure. The law is in every officer manual at every legal assistance office on every base in the country. Maggie Larkin's HOA had violated it 317 times in the last 6 years. 317 separate fines, judgments, and forced collections against active duty military families, totaling $342,418 in cash extracted from the bank accounts of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who had been told to pay or be sued. Most of them had paid. Most of them had not even known they had a defense. Most of them were enlisted, junior, young, broke, scared, and far from home. That's the practical lesson worth remembering. If you are active duty military and a homeowners association is fining you, garnishing you, or threatening to evict you, call the Legal Assistance Office on your installation today. The Service Members Civil Relief Act may already have you covered, and the help is free. Story 2 was the Greg Larkin story. Greg Larkin had worked in Garrison Public Works for 14 years. He was a GS-12. He had quiet authority over a small but lucrative slice of the contracting pipeline. Specifically, he managed groundskeeping and landscaping contracts for several outlying buildings on the post, including the chapel grounds, the visitor center, and the housing office's perimeter beds. For the past 6 years, Greg Larkin had awarded roughly $400,000 per year of those contracts to a single vendor named Front Range Greenscape, LLC. Front Range Greenscape was a Colorado limited liability company. Its registered agent was a law office in Pueblo. Its sole listed officer, behind one layer of holding company, was a Colorado resident named M.R. Larkin of Aspen Bluff Drive. The contracts were no-bid sole source awards. The invoices ran 28 to 40% above standard market rate for grounds work in El Paso County. The company had no listed employees. The company subcontracted every job to legitimate landscapers at standard market rate, took the difference as pure margin, and routed 82% of that margin into an Aspen Bluff Estates consulting fund, controlled by a single signatory. That signatory was Margaret R. Larkin. Greg Larkin had been moving federal money, through a no-bid contract he himself approved, into a shell company owned by his wife, who then routed it into an HOA fund she personally controlled. By the calculations of the Defense Contract Audit Agency analyst I quietly read in on the Monday following, the total exposure was just over $2.1 million in misappropriated federal funds across 6 fiscal years. Wire fraud, mail fraud, honest services fraud, federal contracting fraud, theft of government property, conspiracy. The wife was not just a petty HOA tyrant fining military families. The wife was the laundering arm of a federal contracting fraud her husband had been running out of my own headquarters building. I called Major Pemberton into the conference room on the second Tuesday of June. I called Special Agent Garrett Ashby of Army CID into the conference room 30 minutes later. I called the Defense Criminal Investigative Service, the Inspector General's office at the Department of the Army, and an assistant United States attorney from the District of Colorado named Linnea Vance over the next 48 hours. By Thursday evening, 3 federal agencies had opened active investigations. By Saturday, every relevant document I had pulled was duplicated, certified, and sitting in evidence lockers at 3 separate locations. By the following Monday, AUSA Vance had impaneled a grand jury. I told no one outside the SCIF, not Eleanor, not Caleb, not the housing office, not even the provost marshal, until the moment I had to. The case would only work if Maggie Larkin kept doing what Maggie Larkin had been doing for 8 years uncontested. And she did. She filed 2 more complaints against my family that month. She doubled the towing fine. She told a neighbor at the mailboxes that she was going to have me removed from command by July 4th. I let her keep talking. I let her keep filing. I let her keep building the public record I would, in due course, hand to a federal judge. Maggie Larkin did not know it yet, but she had less than 3 weeks of freedom left, and her husband had less than 2. She came at us harder during those weeks. A wounded animal does. The week after the board meeting, Eleanor came home from the grocery store and found a notice taped to our front door declaring our property in active code default and threatening daily fines until compliance is achieved. That night, someone ran a key down the side of Eleanor's minivan. A long, deliberate scratch from the driver's mirror to the rear bumper. The trail camera mounted on the porch caught a woman in a coral linen blazer walking up to the vehicle, glancing both ways and bending out of frame. The audio caught the sound of metal on paint. 3 days later, a tow truck pulled up at 6 in the morning and started hooking up Caleb's F-150 from our driveway. Caleb came running out in his bathrobe. The tow truck driver, a bewildered man named Buddy with a clipboard, said he had been called by the Aspen Bluff HOA to remove an abandoned vehicle from common area parking. Caleb explained that the truck was parked on private property he could see his own bedroom window from. Buddy looked at the work order. Buddy looked at the truck. Buddy looked at the long, sleepy 19-year-old in front of him. Buddy unhooked the truck, apologized, and drove off muttering about Maggie Larkin in language I will not repeat. I added the dispatch ticket to the binder. I added a second photograph of the key scratch. I added Buddy's verbal statement, taken by Caleb on his phone. I added the security footage of the woman in coral linen. Caleb came inside that morning with his bathrobe still on, and an expression I had not seen on my son's face since he was 9 years old, and a kid at school had ripped the cover off his favorite book. He sat down at the kitchen island. He did not say anything for a long minute. Then he asked me, in a voice that was carefully even, whether I could promise him that the truck would not be taken away. I told him I could promise him 3 things. I told him the truck would stay in our driveway. I told him the woman who had tried to take it would never set foot near it again. I told him that by the end of the summer, he would understand exactly why his father had taught him, every year of his life, to keep receipts. He looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded, the way men in our family nod when something has been agreed without further discussion. He went upstairs and got dressed. He drove the truck to his summer landscaping job. The rust spot caught the morning light on the way down the cul-de-sac like a small badge of defiance. Maggie also went after my career. She found out, through her husband's contacts, the name of the installation management command officer 2 levels above me, and sent him a 16-page complaint with photographs, testimonials, and a neighborhood petition with 31 signatures. Most of those signatures, I would later learn, had been collected by Maggie at a wine and cheese event, with the names written down by Maggie herself in her own looping cursive. The IMCOM General's office forwarded the complaint to my chain through normal channels. My boss called me on a Thursday afternoon and asked me, with the dry patience of a man who had been a colonel for many years before he was a general, if there was anything I needed to brief him on. "Sir," I said, "I'd like to schedule 15 minutes on your calendar for the morning of the Memorial Day picnic. Bring coffee." He laughed. He told me he would clear the morning. He hung up. The third escalation was the one that pushed Maggie past the point where federal prosecutors could have made any other choice. She arranged a press event. On the Friday before Memorial Day weekend, Maggie sent a press release on official Aspen Bluff letterhead to every news outlet in the Front Range. The release announced a Saturday morning press conference at the Aspen Bluff Estates Clubhouse. The subject line read, "HOA to expose pattern of military officers' disregard for community standards." The release named me by rank, named me by full name, named me by address. It promised photographs, testimony from board members, and a community demand that the Department of the Army take appropriate action. She had timed it for the Memorial Day weekend picnic. She had arranged for chairs, a podium, a microphone, and 3 poster boards. She had invited the local news, the Colorado Springs paper, and a Denver television affiliate. She had told her board that this would be the moment she finally broke me. The press release went out at 4:15 on Friday afternoon. Within an hour, Hadley Voss, the contracting officer, brought me a copy he had printed off the Aspen Bluff website. He set it on my desk without a word and waited. I read it. I read it again. I looked up at him. "Master Sergeant," I said, "if a senior commander were to walk into a press event already scheduled by the subject of an active federal investigation, would he be considered to have intentionally compromised the case, or would he be considered to have shown up at a public gathering on a federal holiday weekend?" Hadley Voss has the kind of poker face that 14 years of contracting awards and Article 15s will give a man. He let the question sit in the room for 3 full seconds. "Sir, I believe he would be considered to have shown up at a public gathering on a federal holiday weekend, in dress uniform, with his lawful staff, as any senior commander would on a community event a half-mile from his front gate." I told him to close the door on his way out. He did, but not before he allowed himself the smallest, slowest smile I have ever seen a senior NCO permit himself in the presence of his commanding officer. I read the press release at my kitchen table that Friday night. Eleanor read it over my shoulder. She set down her glass of wine. "Bennett," she said, "she has just invited the cameras to her own arrest." I told her that was approximately correct. I called Major Pemberton at home. I called Special Agent Ashby at home. I called a USA Vance on her cell phone. I called my boss, the general, who had said to bring coffee, and told him to instead bring his dress uniform. I called the provost marshal and the post public affairs officer and the garrison director of operations. We synchronized to the minute. Saturday morning at 08:30, Maggie Larkin was going to walk to her podium and find that the audience she had assembled was substantially larger than the one she had invited. The Memorial Day morning broke clear and warm. The bagpipe band rehearsing for the noon ceremony at Fort Calhoun could be heard a mile away, the slow, mournful notes drifting on the wind toward Aspen Bluff. The smell was new-mown grass and charcoal lighter from somebody's early grill. The mountains were sharp in the dry air. It was the kind of Colorado morning that makes you remember why people move here in the first place. The Aspen Bluff clubhouse parking lot was half full by 8. Maggie had set up her podium under the front portico, with 3 poster boards on easels behind it. The largest poster bore a 6-foot photograph of Caleb's truck with the rust spot circled in red. The second showed our driveway from the curb. The third was a typed list of violations, with my name across the top in 72-point font. A folding banner on the railing read, Aspen Bluff, a community of standards. The local news vans began arriving at 8:15, 2 from Colorado Springs, 1 from Denver. A reporter named Hadley Voss, from the Pueblo paper, no relation to my contracting officer, set up a tripod. Maggie's board members took their seats in folding chairs to the right of the podium, in the matching white polo shirts she had ordered for the occasion. Maggie arrived at 8:20 in a navy blazer and pearls. She smiled for the cameras. She shook hands. She walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and tapped it twice. The murmur in the parking lot died down. I arrived at 8:28. I came in dress blues, the full Army service uniform, with a row of ribbons that took 14 years and 3 deployments to assemble. I was not alone. With me, in formation, walked Major Sloan Pemberton in JAG dress, Special Agent Garrett Ashby of Army CID in a dark suit, 2 Defense Criminal Investigative Service agents, the Director of Garrison Operations, my boss, the Brigadier General, in his own dress uniform, and Assistant United States Attorney Linnea Vance, with a leather portfolio under her arm. Behind us, in a separate vehicle, came a marked sheriff's cruiser from El Paso County, a federal marshal in a Navy windbreaker, and Sergeant Holloway from the 716th MP Battalion, the same NCO who had saluted me on my driveway 4 weeks earlier. The parking lot went silent in the slow, total way it does when a room realizes the temperature has changed. We walked across the asphalt in formation. The local news cameras swung. Maggie's smile stayed for 1 more second, then began to slide off her face the way wax slides off a tilted candle. Her hand on the microphone went still. We stopped 15 feet from the podium. I removed my dress cover. I waited until every camera was rolling. Then I took 2 steps forward to the microphone. Good morning, Mrs. Larkin. You called this press conference to discuss me. I'm here to discuss you. There was a sound from the crowd, low, somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. Maggie's mouth opened. No words came out. I turned to AUSA Vance. She stepped forward. She opened her leather portfolio. Margaret Ray Larkin, Greg Allen Larkin. I am an Assistant United States Attorney for the District of Colorado. By order of a federal grand jury, impaneled June 14th, the United States is filing the following charges against you both. 8 counts of wire fraud, 6 counts of mail fraud, 4 counts of honest services fraud, 2 counts of theft of government property in excess of $1 million, 1 count of conspiracy to defraud the United States. Mr. Larkin, federal marshals are at your residence executing a search warrant as we speak. You are under arrest. The marshal stepped forward. Greg Larkin, who had been standing in the second row holding a coffee cup, dropped the coffee cup. It bounced off the asphalt. The marshal cuffed him in front of his wife, in front of his board, and in front of 3 local news cameras. I turned back to the microphone. Major Pemberton stepped to my side and placed a thick brown folder on the lectern. In addition, I said, the Office of the Staff Judge Advocate, on behalf of the United States Army and 14 named active duty service members, is today filing civil action against the Aspen Bluff Estates Homeowners Association under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. 317 separate violations, $342,418 in unlawful fines and assessments levied against military families over 6 years. Mrs. Larkin, you are not under arrest today. The civil case will proceed in federal district court. You will be served before close of business Tuesday. I looked at her. She looked at me. Her face was the color of new putty. Mrs. Larkin, I said, when you called the military police on my driveway, you called my unit. When you filed the IG complaint, you filed it through my command. When you told my neighbors I was an unauthorized officer, you slandered the man whose signature authorizes everyone on this installation. I do not need to defend myself against you today. The federal government will defend itself against your husband. The military families of this neighborhood will defend themselves against you. And the United States Army will, with respect, no longer be answering your phone calls. I stepped back from the microphone. I put my dress cover back on. I saluted the flag at the corner of the clubhouse, because the flag was watching too. The Brigadier General, who had not spoken until that moment, stepped to the microphone last. Effective immediately, he said, the Department of the Army is revoking all reciprocal dispatch agreements between Fort Calhoun Military Police and the Aspen Bluff Estates Homeowners Association. Your phone calls to our gates, ma'am, will no longer be received. The cameras kept rolling. They got every word. By that afternoon, the footage had aired on every local broadcast in Colorado. By the next morning, the Associated Press had picked it up. By Tuesday, the Army Times ran the headline that would, for years, hang framed on the wall of the Legal Assistance Office at Fort Calhoun. HOA president invited cameras to her own arrest. Greg Larkin pleaded out in October, 42 months in federal custody, 3 years of supervised release, full restitution of $2.1 million, and permanent debarment from any federal contract for the rest of his working life. Margaret Larkin settled the SCRA civil action the following spring, after her attorney informed her that the depositions her own board members were giving were going to make a jury trial worse than a settlement. The settlement wiped out her savings, her retirement account, and the equity in her Aspen Bluff house. She accepted a permanent injunction barring her from holding any officer position in any homeowners association anywhere in the United States. She moved out of Aspen Bluff in August. Every dollar of the $342,000 in illegal fines was returned to the affected military families, with statutory interest by the end of that year. The smallest refund went to a buck sergeant named Sloan Reasoner, whose check came to $112. The largest went to a Marine gunnery sergeant's widow named Theodora Pace, whose family had paid $8,400 in HOA fines while her husband was deployed to Helmand Province in 2017. He had died on that deployment. She cried when Pearl Whitman from the housing office hand-delivered the check. So did Pearl. The Aspen Bluff HOA board was dissolved by a vote of its own residents in July. A new board was elected the following month. The transitional chair, by unanimous request of the neighborhood, was Eleanor Whitford. She accepted on the condition that the bylaws be rewritten from scratch, with input from a JAG officer and a civilian fair housing attorney. They were. The new bylaws ran 12 pages instead of 104. Most of what was removed was the parts that allowed somebody like Maggie Larkin to exist. Eleanor's first official act as transitional chair was to organize the inaugural Aspen Bluff Service Family Cookout, held the Saturday after Labor Day. Every active duty family in the neighborhood, every veteran, every Gold Star spouse, every retiree got a ticket. The food was free, the beer was cold. Caleb's F-150, freshly restored from front to back, with a check Maggie's settlement had paid for, sat under the front portico of the clubhouse with a hand-painted sign on the windshield that read, "Not a combat vehicle. Sorry for the confusion." He stood next to it, shaking hands all afternoon. Eleanor also founded, with my JAG office's backing, the Whitford Family Military Housing Justice Fund. The fund pays for pro bono SCRA legal help for any active duty family in any private HOA in the United States. In its first year, the fund handled cases for 141 military families across 19 states. By year 3, it was the largest of its kind in the country. The seed money came from the proceeds of the Larkin civil settlement. The continuing donations came from soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who had once paid an unfair fine and never wanted another family to do the same. I served 3 more years as the garrison commander of Fort Calhoun. I retired the spring after that. We stayed in Aspen Bluff. The neighborhood is quieter now. The cul-de-sac sounds, on a summer evening, like kids on bikes and grills going and somebody's dog losing his mind over a squirrel. Eleanor still chairs the board, and the board still votes by a show of hands at meetings nobody dreads. So that's the story. A woman who had spent 8 years using my military police as her personal enforcement service called them on the wrong driveway, on the wrong morning, against the wrong man. The federal government found her husband on the way down. $342,000 went home to the families it belonged to. A neighborhood that had been afraid of one woman for the better part of a decade learned how to elect leaders again. If you have ever been bullied by an HOA, especially while serving your country or while supporting somebody who does, drop your story in the comments below. I read every one. Tell me where you're watching from. Your story might be the next one we tell. If you made it to the end and you felt the satisfaction of watching that arrest in the clubhouse parking lot, do me one favor, hit subscribe. There's another HOA story coming next week about a retired NICU nurse who fought a board that tried to fine her for hanging a memorial wreath. I think you'll like it. Until then, take care of your neighbors, keep your records, and if somebody ever tells you that the rank on your collar means you have to take more than the rest, just remind them, very politely, who actually answers the radio when they pick up the phone.
Here's what made Maggie lock in for. And it wasn't the colonel's rank, it was the colonel's patient. Benny's Whitford did not put rank on his own driveway. He let the records do that for him. He waited for weeks while she fired, escalated, and put her own husband's signature on a federal indictment without realizing what she was doing. The real lesson is not that the garrison commander beat the HOA president. The real lesson is that quiet, well-organized documentation always beats loud and accountable authority. Maggie thought a clipboard was power. Benny knew a Bible was power. The difference cost her husband 42 months and gave $342,000 back to military families who has earned it the hard way. If you are active duty and your HOA is leaning on you, call your installation legal assistance office today. The Service Members Civil Relief Act may already protect you. The help is free. If you have lived through your own HOA story, drop it in the comments. I read everyone. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, where a retired NICU nurse takes on a board that tried to fine her for a memorial wreath. Until then, keep your record, keep your patience, and remember, the loudest person in the room is almost never the one who answers the radio.